All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And this is going to be a really cool episode. So today we're here with Chris Panebianco. And Chris, I got that right, correct?
You got it. Very few get it right. I'm impressed.
And we were talking a little bit before we hit the record button, and I am just like really stoked to have this conversation with you today, Chris. I know I shared with you, well, first of all, shout out to the folks over at podcastguest.com because that's how you and I connected. And those guys have become, I've met some pretty amazing podcast guests from that platform. And so I just want to give those guys a shout out. And you and I were talking before we hit the record button, and I was telling you how I had found out about you through those guys. And I was checking you out. I was stalking you, and I found these recordings, these videos of you online, but we were talking before we hit the record button, and you shared some other stuff that I'm like, oh, that's really cool. So I am really looking forward to having this conversation, Chris. And
thanks, Kevin.
Yeah. What we'll do is we'll start by just kind of turning over to you so you can set a little bit of context and give our entrepreneurial listeners, an idea of who Chris is and what Chris is all about. So share, whether you want to share about, what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work you do, the impact you're making. And we'll start there, Chris.
Sure. Well, thank you. And once again, I'm Chris Panebianco. Currently, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Security Tactical. We are one of the largest providers of military armories to the U.S. military. And we went to the consumer market about 7 years ago, and we're really starting to carve out a name for ourselves, doing things different in firearm storage. We want to change the way America thinks about gun storage. There's far too many weapons that aren't secured. There's a lot of children that live in homes with improperly stored firearms, and we just do it a different way. So I'm having a blast. I've been there for a little over a year. Very, very different than where I came from. I was with BHG Financial, which is a very large fintech. They do commercial and consumer lending. I was their CMO for 12 and a half years. Built a team from myself to over 60 when I left. Very large company, present day. In 2009, they had about 55 employees. So I got to see some crazy growth coming out of the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, and learned an abundance of things. I sat on the C-suite, and being the only non-finance guy, it was intimidating, it was scary, but it was one of the best educations I ever had.
Wow.
So I look at everything I've done in my career. I grew up on a potato farm, as you can see from the sign behind me, in upstate New York, family farm since the 1930s. Every waking moment that I wasn't in school or playing a sport, I was working next to my dad, my brother, my uncle, and some cousins. And it taught me a lot about life. I took that to the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, graduated from UNCG, and made my progression a little bit south to Charlotte. Worked for a few different agencies, worked on the private side, worked for a great agency down here in Orlando, which is where I live now. And that got me to where I was with BHG. So I've seen the private side, public side, and then agency side in the digital transformation. So all of it they were all run by entrepreneurs. So for me, it was an early lesson and a lengthy lesson over my 20-year career that I have been side by side with some of the best entrepreneurs in the business. That's where I'm at. My most cherished side of what I do is really away from what pays the bills. Okay. And that's my participation with David's Refuge. They're an amazing charity in upstate New York, expanding from Syracuse to Rochester. They provide respite for families with severely ill children, or they're caretakers. And we're trying to help folks that 24 hours a day cannot leave, cannot focus on their marriage, cannot get a weekend to take care of themselves. I've been on the board for a couple of years now with BHG. We did a lot of sponsorship and built some programs with them. And I just think they're the greatest people on earth. And outside of that, when there's time, I'm consulting mainly with solopreneurs, folks that I meet through the community, through church, that just need some help. I've been very, very blessed and fortunate to do some amazing things in my career. And now these are things I can do for people without a billable rate. Anybody in my industry will understand billable rate. So it's one of the best things I can do, and it's what I'm really passionate about.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Wow. Okay, so now that we've got a little bit of context set, people have an idea of who Chris is and what makes Chris tick. Let's switch gears just a little bit. What I'm gonna reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners, and then we'll dig into this. So, have you ever met or been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Chris, I'm just like really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
Right. And, I've learned a lot about relationships where in the businesses I've worked for, a lot of people, they look at ROI, they look at spending, they look at revenue, and they really don't realize that all of that, at the root of that, are solid relationships.
Yes.
The relationships I'd like to focus on, there's two of them.
Okay.
And one of them will surprise some people that know me, but the other one, anybody who's heard me speak or has engaged with me even over a beer or at a party or anywhere, my father was the most impactful person in my life. Unfortunately, he passed last March in 2022 unexpectedly. But I had 44 years with the greatest human being that ever lived.
Wow.
And I say that because there's a lot of cliches that people use, salt of the earth, they give you the shirt off their back. They don't know the end of the day. My dad was a total package. He was the greatest example as a husband, as a father, as a friend, as an employer, as an employee, as an entrepreneur. I mean, he and my uncle built a legacy with the potato farm that they took from my grandfather, and it provided a pathway to college for cousins, my brother and sister, myself. But most importantly, it taught me the value. A lot of people hear me say, I have a run through walls mentality. Hurdles are hurdles, but I'll run right through them. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is my dad. He taught me that nothing should stand in your way, but don't be careless. To make sure that you invest in yourself, you invest in people, you learn what other people are doing, and then you go set the example, and no one outworks you. If you have to take care of your family and there's something going on with your family, there's nothing more important. You get that done. If you have to take care of something at work, don't look to blame anybody else. You do it yourself. So that mentality stuck with me. And I know he got it from his father and his mother. It's one of those things where when he passed, we had a celebration of life and the church was packed. And the stories that I heard about my dad, everybody, your father in the middle of the night came to do XYZ for me. I needed this and your father did it for me or helped me, or I worked for your father and he taught me. People that have gone on and led very different but very successful careers outside of potato farming. Believe it or not, there's life outside of potato farming. So I knew all of that growing up. My dad would never say it. He was a man of few words. We communicated more over Yankees baseball, golf, my sporting events. In every aspect of my life today, I'm a father today. And one thing that I hold my team accountable to and my family is the expectation that family comes first. So as minor as it might be, it doesn't matter. Go be with your family first, because then I know you'll be great when you're here. Yeah. So he taught me all of that. And, he was just a nice guy. People loved him. You could sit with him. He could fix anything, and it's funny. I married a woman who can fix anything. I don't have to lift a tool. When my father passed, all of his tools went to my wife, his drill press, his saws. But I have videos of my father, and the greatest thing that anybody could see. When he died, I looked through every photo I've ever taken, whether they were the old school Polaroids or, the things you stuff in a box and never look at again, or on your phone. The one characteristic that was in every single picture was the smile he had on his face. The last picture I have of him was on my birthday. We came down from New York. My parents were snowbirds. And all I wanted lobster, but I didn't want to go out. So he went and bought it. And the last picture I have, and I love Apple because it's a live photo, it's him, and he burned his hand on the lobster, but he looked up at me. He was like, oh, and my dad and I shared our love for curse words. But he said, ow, something. And then it was this big smile. And that's the last photo I have of him. Unfortunately, I was here when he passed. My brother and I were able to be here with my mother. But that smile and that love of people and that hard-nosed work ethic were just unbelievable. And, all the pictures everywhere, there's tattoos I have. I have 2 pictures of my dad sitting here. I talk to him every morning. When I'm struggling at something, I just look at it. People probably think I'm crazy, but the people who know me feel as if they knew my dad. And so he is by far, and you feel his loss. I mean, it's been 1.5 years, and people still that I didn't even know talk to me, or they find me on Facebook or on Instagram, and they're like, I feel like I knew your dad through your words, or your brother or your sister or your mom. And, my kids are 8 and 6, and they watch videos of their pop-up every day. And it's just a ritual. That's how big of an impact he had on all this.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. How awesome is that? Yeah, I lost my dad when I was just 16, but I'll tell you, and that was the thing. You and I both grew up on the farm. We didn't own a farm, but I worked on a farm, and I know what it's like. You know what? As a young man, that, at least in my world, that was some work, especially during the season.
Oh, yeah.
Our big season was strawberry season, and our work day started at 5 a.m. and didn't usually get over until 8 or 9 p.m. And that's 7 days a week during strawberry season.
Yep. Potato. My earliest memories were of my dad coming in. I remember being a toddler, and at 2 a.m, he would come in coated in dirt to have dinner. Yeah. Because they put lights on the harvesters, and they had to get the crop in.
That's right.
And that's what you did.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we would do peas too, and somebody else would come harvest. But when we were planting, you had to plant so many acres a day, because that's how many acres they would harvest. And I remember being out of there at midnight, out in the field in dark planting, and so yeah, lots of story. And you know what? I have that work ethic that my dad instilled in me. I mean, well, I spent 7 years, working as a commercial fisherman up in Alaska on the Bering Sea. And there was many years where I was like, Dad, I hope you see me now, because man, this is some work, right?
Right.
But that has always served me well, is having that solid work ethic, and that was one of the things that got me into that fishing industry so quickly, because I was like, I ain't gonna let nobody on this boat outwork me, and that skipper, that captain John, he went out on a limb a little bit, hiring me and giving me a shot. And he was nervous, because he was like, Kevin, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. And he said, I'm just praying that you don't let me down. And I'm just like thinking, challenge accepted. I ain't going to let you down, man. And
there you go.
And I'll tell you, it's, I just turned 58, and, my dad always believed that, he always was like, Kevin, the harder you work, the more successful you'll be. And there's some truth to that, but also what you talked about, not at the expense of our families and of those who are important to us. We got to have some of this balance here, that because I never wanted to be that entrepreneur who, says, well, I'm providing for my family, but they never see me. I want to be present for them. Jeez, I got 7 kids, man. So I want to be that husband and that father
Yeah,
that my kids know, and that I'm around for them and for what's
yeah.
important to them too.
I,
So
it's funny that you say that, Kevin, because I did sacrifice a lot when I was with BHG. I 24/7, but we had to, and that has provided the life we have today. But in choosing to go back after a short retirement, I made sure that it was going to fit, not only culturally, but I walk my kids to the bus every morning. I pick them up in the afternoons. If they've got a teacher conference or a doctor's appointment, or if they've had a surgery, 2 of my sons have had a bunch of surgeries.
okay.
I'm there.
Yeah.
And I made sure, you read these articles or these posts, I always laugh. And it says, oh, family, work-life balance, friends, or passions, choose 2 or choose 3. You can't choose them all. Why not?
That's right. That's right.
You haven't found, you're not sticking to who your true self is if you're not making time for each one of those.
Yeah.
You get up earlier, and I don't get up at 4 o'clock in the morning like somebody, and I don't take ice plunges and all of that. I just wake up every morning and want to do better than I did the day before. I want to be a better father, a better boss, a better husband. I think people, they grab at things too much, and they don't just get up and do what they have to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what my dad taught me.
Yeah.
He never missed a day. He couldn't.
Yeah.
And I have crappy days. There are days where I'm like, oh man, what am I doing? I just want to stay in bed. And you know what? That's not the way to do it. So you get up, you put one foot in front of the other, you make a lot of mistakes, and you go. So I had a really good example that I wish everybody would have.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned there was one other person that you would like
Yeah.
to honor as well.
Yeah. And, I was not the greatest student, which a lot of us can lay claim to. And I really wasn't good at science.
Okay.
However, in middle school, 8th grade, I had one of the most impactful teachers. His name was Mr. Conklin. He was an earth science teacher. He was my dad had him for a teacher. My sister and my brother had him. So by the time I got there, he knew me. And I won't speak for the rest of my family, but we did share some characteristics of not being great students. The first day, he was an old soul. And he said, he laid down the law of, this is what I expect. You'll have 2 notebooks, one for when you're here, and then you're going to go home every night and you're going to take your notes and you're going to rewrite them. And everybody, typical 8th grader, this is stupid, blah, blah, blah. So that was one lesson. And it was being prepared, doing things the right way, and doing them consistently. I got an A in that class, not because I was smart, but because he made me prepare, and I didn't even realize what he was doing. So I always keep a notebook with me. I had a lot of people, they type their notes, they do all that. I have to handwrite everything. And then when I'm done, the last half hour before I disconnect, I rewrite the important stuff. And it's created a steel trap and just a mental workout for me that if you looked at my notebook, it looks like the notes and handwriting of a serial killer. However, when I rewrite that at night, it's much more legible, but it helps me decipher all of the information we take in. I did a presentation years ago and said we take in 2,000 marketing messages or advertisements a day. That number's doubled now because of social media and the constant multi-screen insanity. So he taught me that. He also taught me to enjoy the finer things in life. And most people might say, oh, well, that's, kind of weird. He introduced me to the Grateful Dead. He had an old record player that when we did well as a class, we got to substitute work with music. And I tried to play drums once, but it interfered with kickball. So that was short-lived. But My love for the Grateful Dead, the Foo Fighters, all of that came from this man, an eighth grade earth science teacher.
Wow.
And then the last thing he taught me was opening your eyes to the world. The things that the different lessons, be open to experience, dissecting a frog, going out and picking something and putting it under a microscope, going and learning about microorganisms and the way life is and the way organisms grow and the way the world works. He gave us a sense of curiosity. And that curiosity is translated to me, not in all of those things per se, but reading, watching different things on history, on different cultures, learning my craft in marketing, entrepreneurialism. I listen to podcasts of things that don't make sense. I got masterclass a couple years ago, and I was watching things that my wife was like, "What are you watching? You know, when would you ever cook with Gordon Ramsay?" Or, you know, I watched How to Direct a Movie from Martin Scorsese.
Okay.
Negotiation, you know, things that are just interesting. So that curiosity that he taught us as an eighth grader, it's carried through my entire life. And the impact of those two individuals on me, I think without me even realizing it, has shaped the direction, because I never settled for anything. I always tried to do better every day. I started out of college as an unpaid intern, and I created relationships with everybody I worked with. I created genuine curiosity of folks that I aspired to be like, or that had jobs that I wanted. And I just was always there. I'd take any odd job. I did PR and press releases for Schneider Electric. And if you don't think someone like me can write the greatest press release on a surge protector, you're crazy. You know, Charlotte Pipe and Foundry, Milliken Chemical. I took every job that people didn't want. When I worked in an agency, they gave me all of the RFPs that got thrown in the trash because they were for financial services companies. And that's how I met BHG. They became a client.
Okay.
You know, so I was taking things people wouldn't do, but I had a genuine interest. I wasn't doing it to brown nose. It was because, how can I make your life better? How can I be curious about something I don't know anything about? How can I apply my craft to it?
Yeah.
So I really think those two gentlemen, I wish they were here to you know, we moved to Florida to be closer to my parents, and I was really now have the time to spend with my sons, my daughter, and my father. Fortunately, I still have my mother, who is just an absolute saint. But I'm really sad, and I would love if I ever had the chance to sit down with Mr. Conklin and drink a beer with him, play a little Grateful Dead, and just sit and talk about life. Those are, you know, some things that, you know, one day there will be a beer with those guys.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. That is really, I mean, you know, this has been really enlightening, and just how people, because I have long believed as an entrepreneur that relationships are our most valuable asset. Everything else stems from that. And what you just shared is such an amazing example of that. And if you look back at your relationship with your dad, with Mr. Conklin, um, and over the years, and I'm sure you could come up with a lot of examples. I'm going to challenge you to come up with one example. So if you, and you can choose either man, your dad or Mr. Conklin, but if you look back over your life and where you were able to have a really big impact, and you know, hands down, that would have never happened if not for the relationship with your dad and his influence, or with the relationship that you had with Mr. Conklin. What is one example that just comes up for you top of mind?
It's easy.
Okay.
The most impactful moment that has helped me was, you know, I played basketball. I played sports through high school, and, you know, it was a big deal. Basketball was a big deal to me. And I'll never forget, there was a time where I got benched or I didn't play, and I was one of the better players on the team, and it didn't make sense. I lost it. And I was having a difficult time with my dad. I'll never forget. He came in and sat with me and he listened to me. You know, as a senior or junior, I think I was a junior in high school. It was the end of the world. You know, it was embarrassing. It was, oh my God, you know. And my dad looked me in the eye and said, son, this doesn't matter. He goes, there are going to be a lot of things in life that don't go your way, but it's all about perspective. It's about being in the moment, but also having perspective. When this shall pass. The reason why I bring that up is because I've had 4 or 5 times in my career as a manager, as a CMO, and even with my children now, I've had the same conversation. And the attention to what matters was the greatest moment. I'll never forget that. I remember the color of my room, the comforter. I remember everything. I remember the game, the night that happened, and my dad's calm demeanor and sincere love he showed for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's helped me help other people. And when I look at entrepreneurs, when I look at people coming up, my job is to help lift them up and to tell them, don't sweat the small stuff. There are things that are important in life and there are things that aren't. And it's usually these things we magnify in our own minds and put all of this effort and worry or angst or anxiety into that don't matter, that you miss the things that are actually important, that, you know, all of this could go away, houses, cars, jobs, watches, all of it. But the things that matter, those are what I'm going to focus on. Those are my kids, my wife, my family, my friends, my relationships. That's all that matters. How you made people feel about themselves is what matters.
That's
and
right.
So it's a combination, but that is the one that I've shared many times that is probably the most impactful.
Yeah. And if you look at that, you know, and the conversations that you have had with people over the years around that topic, you know, and pointing out that, you know, that just pointing out that perspective that there's things that matter and there's things that aren't going to matter. And right now, this might seem like a big fat hairy deal, but you know what? It's really not. It's really not.
And it's also hard. Now, let me be very open and honest.
Yeah.
I suck at it.
Yeah.
I'm trying every day, but there are days where I have to stop myself and I'm like, ooh, or I get to that night and, you know, I'm sitting out on my porch and I'm like, oh man, I did that wrong. Why am I so irritated by this? But it also has helped me get very good at self-reflection and, you know, just being in tune with myself to know, you got to apologize tomorrow, or, hey, you have to look at it differently and think differently. So it all roots back from that one conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, Chris, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. For anybody that's listening into this going, man, Kev, I really like Chris. I like the way Chris shows up. How can they get in touch with you or find out more about what you're doing? Any resources?
Yeah,
share?
That's a great question. You know, the easiest way to get me is LinkedIn.
Okay.
Just Chris Panebianco. I'm going to very quickly look at Instagram. That is my other channel that I'm on. You know, it's one of those things where I don't even realize my own name. It's really Chris P.
Okay.
So to go with my love of bacon and bourbon and tattoos, really Chris P. So Instagram or LinkedIn, that's where I'm at. And again, if there's an entrepreneur that just wants to talk marketing, I'm not a billable hour. I'm interested genuinely in helping. So I welcome that. Just reach out to me and, you know, we can have a virtual beer, or if you're in Orlando, even better. You know, but I love to talk marketing. I've built teams and, you know, I've seen culture that's very good. I've seen it that's very bad. And, you know, trying to help people find the middle ground is what I'm passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Or if you're a parent of a special needs child and you just need someone to talk to, that's the other piece that I love doing. And I can connect you with resources with David's Refuge. They're the most amazing charity I've ever been a part of. And Absolutely love those guys.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Chris, once again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you, and I'm excited to share this with a lot of other people because I know
My
the
pleasure.
impact that it's going to have. So thanks.
Well, thank you for what you do. I think you had mentioned I'm number 215, and there were 214 other people that have amazing stories too. And I just love that you're as passionate about doing this. And I'm glad we got connected.
Yeah,
Look forward to the future.
absolutely.